On Palm Sunday, the inhabitants of Jerusalem rushed towards the Mount of Olives to welcome Jesus. They did that because they believed that he was, or at least that he might be, the Messiah. Now, we know, because we can read the kind of things that they were writing and saying in Jesus' time, that there were two major sources of this hope that they were looking to in the Old Testament scriptures about what the Messiah would be and what he would do. The first was a promise made to King David by the prophet Nathan in 2 Samuel 7. We read there, "The Lord declares to you," this is Nathan, the Lord speaking to David through Nathan, "The Lord declares to you that the Lord himself will establish a house for you. When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name. I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. When he does wrong, I will punish him with a rod wielded by men, with floggings inflicted by human hands. But my love will never be taken away from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed from before you. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever." That promise had fallen on hard times in Jesus' day. Instead of being ruled by a descendant of David, the Israelites in Jesus' time were ruled by an Edomite named Herod. They were waiting for a descendant of David to take the throne and reestablish this eternally promised kingdom that God had spoken about here. There's another messianic expectation much closer in time to Jesus than David and Nathan. We find this one in Daniel chapter 7. And here, I'd like you to open there with me, because we're going to look pretty close at this messianic passage, this passage that defined the character of the hope that the people had on Palm Sunday for Jesus. In Daniel chapter 7, Daniel is given a vision of God. He's given a vision, of a number of things we'll look at here in a little bit. But starting with those indented words in Daniel chapter 7 and verse 9, he describes seeing God. So in verse 9 it says, "As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days," that's God, "took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow. The hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and its wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened." Daniel's vision continues in verse 13. "In my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed." That's who the people in Jesus' day were looking for. That Son of Man who would be given that authority by God and would be given his reign. So the Palm Sunday people were looking for this Son of Man. This human who would be given authority and power by God, the one who would establish this eternal kingdom. In short, they were looking for someone, not just someone, they were looking for a descendant of David who would take this throne and would reign. They were looking for a ruler that would be chosen and sent by God to establish a kingdom that would last forever. But there is a problem. There's a problem. When Jesus arrives, this throne is not empty. Not really. Here I want to have you take a closer look at Daniel's vision in chapter 7. I want you to see what precedes the vision where we started reading in verse 9. We'll see there, at the beginning of chapter 7, that the powers which preceded the arrival of the Son of Man are horrible, wretched, violent beasts. Starting in verse 2, Daniel said, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me were the four winds of heaven churning up the great sea, and four great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. The first was like a lion. It had wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, "Get up and eat your fill of flesh." After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard, and on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like that of a human being and a mouth that spoke boastfully. These beasts represent the cruelty and the violence and the brutality of the powers in a world that is ruled by sin. Ever since Adam and Eve's fall from the Garden of Eden, man's mortality, the struggle of our labor to produce food, and our cruelty towards each other has been unleashing violence and fear and sadness to all of mankind. Because our sin has caused death to rule, has led to the conditions there where our world and the powers within it can be described as beasts. So our mortality, the brokenness of our world, our sinful hearts, and our corruption have put death and its ruler on the throne. The beasts are a condition of a world where Satan reigns through the power of death. That's what the world looks like when Satan is on the throne. They are a sign, these beasts in Daniel 7, that this throne is presently occupied. Still in Daniel 7 now, notice that right before the Son of Man approaches God to be enthroned, starting in verse 12 now. Something must be accomplished first. Sorry, in verse 11. I'm going to get this right someday about Daniel 7. Starting in verse 11. We read there, "Then I continued to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time." So right before the Son of Man comes in this vision, these beasts, and in fact the one ruling over all the beasts, is destroyed. It is vanquished, and the beasts of the world have their power taken away. Jesus came to be both the Davidic king and to be the Son of Man. He came in fulfillment of these Old Testament promises, the fulfillment of the promises that these people on Palm Sunday were looking for the fulfillment of. He came to sit in this throne. But remember the problem. It is presently occupied. There's already somebody there. And the solution to this problem will not be so simple. Because we have put death in this chair. We were the ones that did that. And that's a big deal to God. Check out these words from Isaiah chapter 24. We read there, "The earth is defiled by its people. They have disobeyed the laws, violated the statutes, and broken the everlasting covenant. Therefore a curse consumes the earth. Its people must bear their guilt. Therefore earth's inhabitants are burned up, and very few are left." Its people, that's us, must bear their guilt. God didn't put death and Satan on the throne. We did. God's righteousness and holiness requires that justice must be done. And we are justly suffering under the rule of Satan and death because of our sin, which we chose, which put them in power. We are the ones that gave Satan his power. It was our iniquity, our rebellion. Thus, we cannot remove him from this throne. We're the ones that put him there. We ourselves owe the debt of death because of our sin, and we cannot satisfy the debt that we owe, which has led to us being ruled by beasts, like the ones we read about in Daniel 7, by us living in a world that is ruled by them, as described. Therefore, each of us are bound. It's not just one problem, but it is a problem that many of us share in all kinds of different ways, because we have all sinned and we have all given this power to death. We have all put death on the throne where someone else belongs. The Bible is very clear about who is in charge here in our world. Okay? It doesn't mix words about who reigns on this earth. In 1 John 5:19, we're told that the whole world is under the control of the evil one. In Colossians 1:13, the ruling power in the world is called the dominion of darkness. In Ephesians 2:2, we are told that the prince of power of the air is the spirit who now works in the sons of disobedience. And in 2 Corinthians 4:4, we are told that there is a force binding the minds of unbelievers called the God of this age. We have no way out of a world like that. Because of sin, there is death. Because of death, Satan rules over our world, and we suffer the miserable consequences of violence and disease and pain and sadness and brokenness. And this is where Jesus steps in. Not only is he going to be the promised Davidic king and son of man, he's going to ransom people away from these evil powers with his life. This will be accomplished just as the prophet Isaiah spoke, when all of our iniquity is laid on him and he pays the debt that none of us can afford. Now I want you to see these words from the Palm Sunday account in the Gospel of John, words I did not get to reading in our opener today. Jesus says in John 12, starting in verse 31, just as he has entered Jerusalem, just days before his crucifixion, "Now is the time for judgment on this world. Now the prince of this world will be driven out. And when I am lifted up from this earth, as he would be on the cross, I will draw all people to myself." So this morning, as we celebrate Palm Sunday, this occasion where Jesus approaches Jerusalem for the final Passover, I'd like you to have a better understanding of what he is there to do. God sent Jesus to be king, but he sent him to the world where the throne of this world was already occupied by death. He came to rule over a people who owed a debt to the devil, to whom we had given allegiance by our sin. So before Jesus could take the throne, he had to break the power of the ruler who was sitting in that chair. And there is only one way it could be done. Jesus, the righteous God, the author of life itself, would go willingly, of his own accord, to be turned over to the powers of darkness that wanted to destroy him. So he rode into Jerusalem on a donkey's colt on Palm Sunday, knowing what the people there would do to him in just a few days. Knowing the pain and anguish that he would face from the ruler of this world and the wicked men who do his work. And all the world's evil would converge in that moment to seize and devour him. He would not resist or fight back, because he came to the earth for this very purpose. And the love of God for all who were enslaved to sin and death would compel Jesus to submit his life into the hands of his captors, so that they would do the only thing that they know how. So that they would do the work of the ruler that had been sitting on the throne for so long. So that they would kill and destroy. He would be abandoned by his closest friends. He would be beaten by those who had been given the task of administering justice. And he would be mocked by the very people he came to save. They were so proud to have seized him. So happy to get to shed his blood. So delighted to see him humbled and humiliated, because they had done the work of their ruler. Nails would pierce his hands and feet. He would cry out, suffer unimaginable pain, and mercifully die. I want to read to you the account of this moment from the Gospel of Mark. So I want to read to you the account of the crucifixion in Mark. Would you just bow your head with me as we read this passage? The soldiers led Jesus away into the palace, that is a praetorium, and called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a purple robe on him, then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him. And they began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Again and again they struck him on the head with a staff and spit on him. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led them out to crucify him. A certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him. Dividing up his clothes, they cast lots to see what each would get. It was 9 a.m. when they crucified him. The written notice of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." They crucified 2 rebels with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "So you who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, come down from the cross and save yourself." In the same way, the chief priests and the teachers of the law mocked him among themselves. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. Let this Messiah, this King of Israel, come down now from the cross so that we may see and believe." Those crucified with him also heaped insults on him. Now from the Gospel of John. Later, knowing everything that had now been finished, and so the scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, "I am thirsty." A jar of wine vinegar was there, so that they soaked a sponge in it. They put the sponge on a stalk of hyssop plant and lifted it to Jesus' lips. When he had received the drink, Jesus said, "It is finished." With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Thank you. That's what Jesus did to defeat the power of sin and death. That's what it took. That's what it cost to dethrone the ruler of our world so that it could belong to the one who belongs in that seat. Before Jesus could ascend the throne, Satan and the powers of death and darkness had to be confronted and they had to be defeated. The only way to do so was to satisfy the debt of death that we owed them by our guilt. And that is precisely what Jesus did on the cross. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. Please pray with me. Dear God, thank you so much for the cross of Jesus. Thank you for loving us so much that you would be willing to send your son to do that. God, thank you for the faithfulness of your son who bore that punishment so that we could be set free. God, we know who belongs on the throne. We know who our rightful and true ruler is. We know that it is only your son, Jesus. God, thank you for taking away our enslavement. Thank you for setting us free from our cruel and wicked masters. God, the blood of Jesus and his broken body that paid that price are so precious to us. God, as we come to you in worship, especially on this Sunday, the Sunday when we remember your son walking to Jerusalem to do what he did for us on the cross, we just express our gratitude to you. We are humbled and awed by your love, and we offer you thankfulness of our hearts and our praise. Pray this in your name. Amen.